Welcome, everybody. And it's a subject, this COVID 19 or 19 or whatever it is, and business, which has obviously attracted a little bit of attention. So we're very pleased to be able to bring you some people to help navigate what could be a very changing and changeable scene across the next few weeks and months, perhaps. But now I have with me Karen Hillen from Hillen Staff Solutions, and we've invited Karen on to give us few clues, if she can, about how this current situation might affect some of the people with staff and related incidents. So, hello, Karen. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's an absolute pleasure. And hopefully, between me and everybody else out here in small business land, we'll be able to give you a grilling and have you provide us with some good ideas to make it easier for us to navigate this stimulus package, and indeed not just the stimulus package, but of course the COVID-19 itself, and how that relates to staff and so on. Yeah. First up, what happens relative to if we have a staff member who returns from overseas, for example, and now of course, because of the message last night, I think it was, has to self-isolate for 14 days. What's our situation there, please, Karen?
Okay, so I think those announcements over the weekend probably change the situation a little bit. So I've been getting quite a few questions over the last few days, as you can imagine, about a lot of these sorts of things. And before the weekend, the advice probably would have been slightly different, because there wasn't that absolute directive that if you come back from overseas from midnight last night, you have to self-isolate for 14 days. So the fact that you're directed to do that it sort of takes it out of the employer's hands a little bit, I believe. Whereas before, if somebody returned on Saturday and they wanted to come to work and you as an employer said to them, I don't want you to come for the next 14 days, technically you're probably telling them not to come, even though they're ready and willing to come to work. So you probably would have had to pay them because they were willing to come. I think the announcement over the weekend has changed that, because now they aren't able to come to work. You're not telling them not to come. They're actually being told by the government that they can be fined, in fact, if they don't self-isolate, which my interpretation of that would mean that they'll have to take leave. I suppose the thing is, then it really comes down to what type of leave. If they're not sick, it's not really personal carers leave. So if they are having to self-isolate, it really most likely going to be annual leave or leave without pay. Now, there's probably some variations on that. And that could be, for instance, if a family came home today and the whole family has to self-isolate and the children can't go to school, well, then you're probably entitled to personal carers leave because you have to stay home to care for a sick child. Whereas if you don't have children, you've got to take your own leave. So that's a sort of little bit of, I suppose, inequity in a way. And I dealt with a similar case recently with the floods up here on the North Coast, where some employees couldn't get to work. The ones that didn't have children and just couldn't get to work because the roads were flooded, the legislation says that there's nothing really to cover them and they have to take their own leave. Whereas another employee who couldn't get to work because the road was closed and their child couldn't get to school, they could take personal carers leave. So it's sort of not fair in a way, but that's the way the legislation's written. So it gets a little bit tricky in that way. But basically, if you've been directed to self isolate, you really the employee is really going to have to take their own leave. And of course, if they're casual, there is no leave. They just don't get paid for not coming to work.
So, and therein, of course, lies the complexity, which is where the difficulty arises for people to work these things out, especially those of us who are not dealing with it on a regular basis. It can be, well, it's confusing, and hearing you explain it, I'm hearing it perfectly simply and clearly, but it's a confusing area of events, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And to be totally honest, that's just my interpretation of what I'm reading on the Fair Work website and their advice. You know, somebody might interpret it in a different way, but and then you've really got the thing of, okay, if somebody came back on Friday, they haven't been directed to self-isolate, but as a business owner, if you don't want them to coming to work, well, then there's that real, again, it's a bit of an inequity really, because just because they happen to come home a day or two earlier than the directive, it gets quite tricky in relation to how that's going to be dealt with. And especially for small businesses, you know, a bigger business is going to struggle, especially if there's lots and lots of people that start being told they've got to self-isolate, because who knows what's going to come next. At the moment, it's for people that have returned from overseas, but, you know, in a few more days' time, that might be you know, another group of people might be told to self-isolate. So I'm checking the Fair Work website about every half hour just to see if there are any updates there. But it really is just one of those things. I think it's just a matter of checking constantly to see what, if any, new advice is coming out.
As I've been mentioning a lot through today, you know, the best way to be able to make informed decisions is to stay well informed.
Absolutely. Yep.
And part of that is, as you say, let's go and check the Fair Work website. If we have employees,
Yep.
let's go and check that. And of course, a major thing about having employees is, generally speaking, you don't want them not to be at work, because they're what makes your business operate the way it operates.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really tough. You know, I've been talking to a few small businesses over the weekend, and they're trying to do everything possible to protect their staff. So, you know, tradies, for instance, they can't work from home. You know, they're going into people's houses to, you know, fix the toilet, or, you know, do some renovations on a house or whatever that might be. So they don't have the luxury of saying, okay, well, we're going to put this working from home situation into place, which is great for people who can work remotely. But that's not possible for tradies. It's not possible for people that work in retail or in hospitality. So it really is, I suppose, making sure that you can educate yourself as much as possible. So if you've got staff that can come to work, and hopefully that's most of your staff, that you're really making sure that, you know, they're doing all of the basic things, like making sure they're washing their hands and, you know, all of those things that really, honestly, we should be doing anyway, but just being more aware of it, and, you know, just doing everything possible to make sure that people are really aware of what they need to be doing.
Indeed. Now, you mentioned, you know, people being required to self-isolate and therefore not being able to turn up at work. But what about if I have an employee and for whatever reason, I think that somebody should be sent home? Now, there's so many different scenarios in what I said, which sounds like a fairly simple statement.
Yeah.
But can you pick two or three and give us some clues on what could or is likely to happen if I send an employee home?
Yeah, so the information that's on the Fair Work website at the moment. So I think Linda just put a link down there in the chat box. But if you search Fair Work Corona, you will find the page you need to visit. But the information on there really is saying if you require somebody to not attend work and they're not sick, it can't come out of their personal carers leave. So in that situation, and again, I'm just looking on the website on a different screen. There's a section there that says, what if an employer wants their employees to stay home as a precaution? So it basically says that you should request that they visit their doctor and get a medical clearance. And that would be around situations of if they have recently been overseas, for instance, and you are worried. I think one of the common ones is, people are saying, my employees just got back from Bali on the weekend. So at the moment, Bali's not, a place on the list of, what we were looking at last week, even though now it doesn't matter where you've come from, you've got to self-isolate, now. But if somebody came home from Bali on the weekend, technically there's nothing to say they can't come to work. So if you suspect they're sick, you could ask them to go to the doctor and get a clearance. You'd probably have to pay them for that day or two while they arrange that. So again, if there's a possibility to be able to get people to work from home, that would be great, but it's not possible in every situation. But yeah, sort of the information on the website really does really go back to the legislation and the Fair Work Act. So it's not really giving much more leeway in relation to making those choices at the moment, rather except in relation to what the Act says. So if as an employer, I want to send somebody home, but they're willing to come to work, you have to pay them because you're directing them to go home. But what I'd be saying to them is, I've got a concern that you're unwell. Please go to the doctor, get a doctor's certificate, get a clearance. So then you can feel comfortable that they're either okay to come back to work, or in fact, they do need to stay away because they've got a doctor's certificate.
Indeed. So a complex area, but there are people out there who know, like Karen, and of course, there's Fair Work. You can always give Fair Work a call.
And absolutely, I'm trying to interpret the information that's there as much as possible. That's my interpretation of what's stated on the website and what's in the Act.
Indeed. And of course, there's a lot of common sense needs to be applied to these sort of things. We don't want to rush around in a panic and mess things up. Just have some common sense and apply critical thinking, and we might be right. Kerry says, for example, in the comments, I was thinking of closing my bricks and mortar studio, need time to move out and might miss out if we go into lockdown, so decided to teach online until we get back to personal contact, which, okay, common sense approach, allowing for the business to continue, just a slightly different format. And we might see lots of changes like that as we go through this coronavirus issue.
Yeah, and look at, I'm seeing things coming up. A networking group that I belong to, they've put all of their meetings online for who knows how long, but that's come out, I think today or yesterday. So, wherever possible, it's great if you can do that. But as I said, it's not possible in every situation. So yeah, wherever possible, it's great to be able to come up with those alternatives. And yeah, it's really, I think the whole common sense thing really does need to come into play where whatever you can do, I heard somebody talking on the radio this morning, I think it might have been a government minister from Queensland or Victoria, saying one of the things they're doing in the public sector is trying to get their public servants to work staggered hours. So there's less risk, I suppose, of those people taking public transport at peak hours. So some of those things, if they're possible, maybe if you can stagger people's hours where, you know, they might be able to work the same amount of hours, but, you know, start really, really super early, or start at 11 when most people are off public transport. All of those different options that can be looked at, if they're possible, are all the things that I suppose people are already thinking about.
Indeed. And of course, it's probably worthwhile remembering that these measures are not really put in place to keep us apart. They're actually only to slow the spread of the virus, which in turn will give us a greater opportunity to have our hospitals perform at a level that is acceptable, rather than swamping them with a whole bunch of sick people that they don't necessarily need to be swamped with.
Yeah, and probably even people that are going to the doctors that aren't sick, that just want to be tested. So, but, you know, I'm certainly not an expert in that, nothing to do with HR, but,
no, indeed.
But yeah, look, I think all of those things, there's just so many things to think about, isn't there?
Yes, and one of those might be, what about if I have an employee and that employee's child goes to school and the school that child goes to is closed?
Yep.
What on earth happens there? Is that leave? Is that
that's personal carers leave? So that's a pretty easy one to answer.
Oh, good.
That's personal carers leave. So if you're the parent of a school-aged child and they can't go to school because their school's closed, that's personal carers leave. So that is a pretty easy one, because you're the carer, and you have to be, you know, the person responsible for having to stay home with them. But yeah, that would be personal carers leave if the child's school's closed.
Indeed. So I'm pleased we found a nice, easy one, Karen.
It's probably the only easy one.
Oh, dear. What would be some of the things that an employer might have to think about if he or she has the opportunity of having the employees work from home? What does that bring into play? Probably lots, I'm thinking.
Yeah, and look, I think in these sorts of circumstances where it's a bit ad hoc and it's not like a long-term working from home arrangement, I'd be wanting to think about things like, you know, do they have the appropriate workspace at home that they can work from? Having a working from home checklist that covers things like, you know, your health and safety, you know, ergonomics in relation to if you're, you know, sitting at a desk all day, that, you know, you've got that sort of set up at home. On a bit of a temporary basis, you know, having a bit of a checklist that you can look at's great. And you can be, I think, a little bit more informal about it than what you would be if it was a longer term working from home arrangement. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean that safety is not important, because it absolutely is, but you know, you can get some good working from home checklists to actually have a look at. And I've got one. If people are interested, I'm happy to post the link in the comments or send it to people, whatever you would prefer me to do.
By all means, pop it in the comments, and just make sure you send it to everybody, because tricky one, this one. It has limitations on who you can send to.
And it's just a bit of a checklist. So there might be things that you didn't think about in relation to making sure that people are, you know, having all of the things they need to look after their health and safety while they're working from home. Making sure that the technology works, and making sure that you have a list of the duties that the person's going to perform, and how do they check in? You know, are you going to do a Zoom call with them a couple of times a day to check in? That might be a little bit extreme. Or are you going to have a Zoom team meeting with people that are working from home each day just to check in and see how everything's going? all of those things I think that you probably not really thinking about because it's not something you have formally in place. But yeah, I suppose just making sure that people feel comfortable with the work that they've got and that they do have enough work. There's no point telling somebody you can work from home if there really is nothing that they can do and they don't have their technology set up properly. Although I think these days people's technology at home allows them to work from home. So it really is just making sure that the work's there and everybody's on the same page in relation to availability and what the requirements are from the employer's point of view. So, you know that the work's getting done. You want to trust your employees, but, you know, there could be time critical things that need to be done. There might be deadlines. So just having to think about how all of those things will work from a technology point of view.
And whilst there was a lot of information in there, the main thing I heard, I think, is clear communication and clear understanding of expectations and capability.
Yes. So, you know, working from home is not just going and sitting around waiting for an email to come in or for the phone to ring. There'd have to be, you know, a list of duties that you would be expected to perform at home. And I would imagine they'd be pretty similar to what you'd be doing in the office, for instance. It's just that you're doing them from a different location.
Indeed. And a message came in on the comments. Could there be a possibility that we stop from accessing our money online? What if the banks close up? Not Karen's area of expertise and not mine, other than all sorts of things could happen. I don't think that's going to. That's probably the main things I think that are likely to happen in the current circumstances. Is that fair comment that we've already covered there, Karen?
Yeah, look, I think they are the main points. You know, working from home if it's possible. You know, that's going to be a great solution. But, you know, I suppose thinking out of the box of if you do have employees that can't work from home, what extra precautions you might be able to put in so they feel comfortable as possible. So just reminding people to, you know, probably keep their distance from people, you know, whatever the guideline is at the moment, wherever possible, making sure that you're not having that close contact with people if working from home is not a possibility. Just really being aware of the health and safety requirements, I suppose, from a workplace legislative point of view, but also the health and safety messages that are being put out generally in relation to, you know, contact with people not at work. Yeah, I think that clear communication, what you said before, I think is key in most things to do with HR, but especially in this sort of situation. I think, you know, just communicating really clearly, making sure that everybody gets the information that you have, and just being really honest with people if you're not sure and, you know, you're not sure what to do next, that you're honest about that, so you can all work together to come up with the best solution. Sometimes employees might come up with a solution that the employer hasn't even thought about. So just working with employees and employees working together, I think.
Yes, good ideas are not necessarily restricted to a few.
Yes.
So, and we've got a comment from the Facebook remote OH&S assessments of home office environments using some tech is unintrusive and a good idea to mitigate risk. And yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So all of those things look at as easily and clearly as possible. And of course, with all of this, once again, there's fair work. If you're not sure, if you can't get hold of Karen or somebody who's in a similar position to Karen, fair work.
Yep.
They understand these things. So let's ask questions of them if we don't understand, because we've got to be better informed. Where could we be better informed than through Fair Work? Well, Karen perhaps, but Fair Work will probably have the right answers.
Absolutely. And look, I think the thing is, you know, like I said, I've been checking their website about every half hour today, and their advice hasn't been updated since Friday. They probably are waiting to see whether there's anything else that they really need to add.
You're probably looking for more clarity or finding
Yeah.
more clarity in the things that are out there so that they do provide the right information.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think as things go on and things changes, then, if more restrictions come in, Fair Work might have to start providing some extra advice, information. Who knows what's going to come next? At the moment, there are, entitlements in relation to the Act and People's Awards, but it may get to the point where they may need to start implementing some other type of entitlement. For instance, who knows what it is, like if employees can't come to work, they might have to implement some sort of benefit that people can access. I have no idea what's going to come next, or what might happen.
No, indeed, there's lots of ifs out there, and
Yes.
of course we can only deal with what we have at the present time.
Yeah.
Got a question from the Facebook Live. If a business has to close down due to enforced quarantine, are employees to be paid when not at work? I'm assuming annual leave first, but then is it leave without pay? Have you got any ideas on that one?
Yes, that would be the way it is. The thing with stand down, and I was reading something this morning about it. So there is a provision for stand down in a lot of awards and in the legislation, but it usually is somebody can be stood down without pay if there's some sort of reason that a business can't operate. But they're usually things like mechanical breakdown or equipment breakdown, things like that. And from my understanding, it doesn't cover things like this. So if you did have to close down, say for instance, the employer comes down with coronavirus and has to shut down the business, you'd probably have to be talking to your employees to see if what sort of leave they want to access. But I will get some more information about that. And I think as things progress more, there might be some more information that comes out in relation to what constitutes a stand down.
Indeed. And look, as that becomes available, we might get you back and have further conversation about that. But essentially, it's have a clear conversation between employees and employers, and deal with the situation as it is.
Yep. And I think the thing is, it's going to be hard on employers, especially small businesses. It's going to be hard on employees when employees have to start accessing their leave that they might have saved for a holiday at the end of the year or whatever that might be. But, I think there are lots of things that are happening, you can't go to the footy, and you can't, all of these other things that are interrupting, people are having to cancel their holidays. So there's lots of things going on at the moment that are just completely out of the ordinary. So I really think it is about, as much as possible, being able to work to get employers and employees being able to work together to come up with solutions. And I think everybody's going to have to make some adjustments along the way.
A bit of give and take in each direction.
Yeah. And look, I think the thing is, people just, hopefully will come together in these sorts of situations to try and work together for the best solution that's going to help everybody out.
Indeed, because it's probably a relatively short-term difficulty that we're going through at the moment.
Yeah.
And in getting through that difficulty, then we're in a better position on the other side.
Yep.
So if we can work together and get to that, then probably a good thing. Now I'm just going to put in here, just in case some of our viewers would like to get in contact with you, I'm going to put your website down here, but you could tell us about it while I'm doing that. It's www.hillenstaffsolutions.com.au. all one word,
Yes.
hillenstaffsolutions.com.au,
Yes.
and I've just popped it in the chat area there now.
Yep.
If you'd like to get in contact with Karen, by all means, just follow her up through that website, and she'll be able to provide you with some help there. Before we let you get away, is there something special that people should do in the ordinary course of business to have better staff relations?
Oh, look, I think, again, it goes back to what we were talking about before. Clear communication's probably one of the biggest things. Making sure people really understand what your expectations are. Having good policies and processes will always help you with that. Telling people when they've done a good job, simple things like that. I think if people know that you appreciate that they're doing a good job and you tell them, that goes a long way to creating a really great, happy workplace. From a HR point of view, a lot of the time I see things go wrong when the communication isn't as good as it could have been.
As with most things in life.
Absolutely.
So let's do our best to help everybody have good communications.
Yeah.
And I think you've done a big part of that today. Thank you, Karen. Really appreciate you being part of this to help people understand what's going on at the moment. Because as we know, it's all fluid, it's all changing. Might change tomorrow, might change tonight, might change in a week. But for the moment and ongoing, it's not going to change. This part's not going to change. Good, clear communication, understanding each party's particular point of view is the best thing that we can have.
Absolutely. And look, if you're not sure about something, like you said earlier, have a look on the Fair Work website, get some advice. If you're a member of an industry association, talk to them. If you're a member of a business chamber, talk to them. Get advice from places that are going to be well informed, and educate yourself.
Perfect spot I think for us to leave this, Karen. Thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to chatting with you again shortly.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.